about this more tomorrow, but the idea is to establish a blending program in translation studies at Harvard University in collaboration with the Center in Translation Studies at the University of Manchester. And we will discuss this in a lot of detail tomorrow, so I won't go into each details. It's a real pleasure to have Professor Baker here speak at Harvard University for the first time. It's not the first time. She's been a guest of this department before, and I'm not going to. Okay, so she told me to be brief. Yeah, so she warned me. So let's get here. I'm going to try and not go on and on about her many contributions to the field of translation studies. But I just mentioned 3 things that I think are important. Of course, Professor Baker is widely published, established numerous articles, studies on translation studies. I just mentioned a number of books. So she's the author of In Other Words, which is the first book on translation, originally published in 1992, but there's a second edition in 2011. She's also the author of Translation and Conflict, and I have published by Routledge in 2006. She's the editor of Routledge Encyclopedia of Translation Studies. The second edition was co-edited and published in 2009. Author of Critical Concepts, Translation Studies, again, it's a 4-volume work published by Routledge 2009, and Critical Readings in Translation Studies 2010. Professor Baker is founding editor of The Translator, which is one of the most important specialized journals in translation studies. She's also the editorial director of St. Jerome Publishing, again another publishing, one of the most important publishing houses specialized in translation studies. And she's founding president, vice president of the International Association for Translation and Intercultural Studies. Professor Baker was the honoree of the 2011 5th session of Abdullah bin Abdul Aziz International Award for Translation for her contribution to the field of translation. She's a member of the evaluation committee of the ICREA, which is the Catalan Institution for Research and Advanced Studies, a really very prestigious foundation supported by the government of Catalonia. And its mission is to promote high-level research in Catalonia in any area of knowledge. It's a very long list. I'm not going to go on about it. I'm going to take her warning very seriously. But I will just mention that she's also, in the past 2 years, she's been very involved in workshops in translation studies in the Arab region. And she organized 2 British Academy-sponsored workshops in translation studies and training for Middle Eastern researchers and translators, but mostly Arabs. So it's Arab, Turkish, and Canadian researchers and translators. In Amen, and again, she established the Translation Studies Portal, which is an open source web resource that collates research and news on translation studies. And again, she's going to talk more about this tomorrow. It's a great pleasure and honor to have you here, and
thank you very much for that. Let's see if this works properly. Is this okay? Right. Thank you very much for the nice introduction. I'm glad I told you to be here. It's a pleasure to be here and to be at the beginning of what I hope is going to be quite a long-term collaboration with Cairo University and hopefully with other universities in the region. We hope to go on beyond the 3 years funded by the British Academy to develop translation studies more widely in Egypt and in the region. I think it's an extremely important discipline to develop particularly in Egypt at this time, because it's all about mediation, it's all about interaction and communication, and if we could learn to communicate better and mediate better and more responsibly, more passively, with more attention and alertness to issues of politics that we're going to talk about today, I think things will be a lot easier for all of us now in the region. So I'm going to talk about the lecture is, of course, part of the bigger event, and so I'm going to concentrate on issues which are relevant to the project. As you know, the MA that we are developing is not just any MA in translation studies, it's an MA very specifically in the ethics and politics of translation, and I think it's probably the first of its kind anywhere in the world. I don't know of any other MA that is focused on the ethics and politics of translation. So I'm going to talk, I pitched the lecture to really address issues that are going to be relevant in the development of both the MA and hopefully a doctoral program in the future, and to joint research projects with colleagues here at Cairo University. And the first thing I think we ought to do is to try and engage with the key notions that we're going to work with, ethics and politics. What do we mean by ethics? What do we mean by politics? I'm not going to try and give definitive definitions of anything, nor do I think that education is about giving definitive, authoritative definitions of anything. I'm going to offer my own understandings of these terms as a starting point, but with the assumption that the debate around what ethics means, what politics means, is very much part of what we will be doing on the MA and the laboratory program. So if we start with, this is refusing to work again. Okay. If we start with ethics, of course, if you look at the very vast literature on ethics, you'll find lots of different definitions. This is my own understanding of it, which is open to challenge, to elaboration in different directions. But for me, ethics is all about the way in which your behavior as a human being impacts the lives of others. The lives, meaning not just life and death, but welfare in general. And therefore, it's all about having an other. You can't be ethical in a corner on your own without the kind of interaction that goes on very much in the context of translation. And the reason ethics is a very problematic area of not area of study. I mean, you can study anything relatively in a relatively uncomplicated way, but it's a very problematic aspect of our day-to-day business, as it were, is that the self and other are inseparable. If you could just extract yourself completely from other people, there would be no ethical dilemmas. The problem arises because everything you do in life has an impact on others to a greater or lesser degree. So even, the typical example, even things like committing suicide, you can say it's my life, what's it to you, irrespective of any religious arguments. Why should anybody be affected by my decision to take my own life? Even that, of course, has a lot of impact on those around you, those who care for you, those who find you, those who have to do things with the body, whatever. So nothing you do is yours alone. It's always, you cannot separate yourself from other, and that's why ethics becomes a problematic area of human life and human behavior. And so ethical behavior, very simply as I understand it, means everything you have to do, everything all the kind of processes, cognitive and otherwise, that go on in your mind, as you try to balance the rights, not just your rights with the rights of others. The problem is that there are many others. It's not a single other. There are many others, and often the rights are conflicting. So as you attend to the rights of one party, you perhaps are unfair to another party. So this is where the issue becomes problematic, and translation is very much embedded in that kind of context. I'll give you concrete examples very shortly. And the other problematic issue, and this is particularly important in the context of pedagogy and education, and one which we have to confront as we devise a program that attends to issues of ethics and data politics of translation. Problematic issue is that you cannot codify ethical principles once and for all. In vocational degrees of translation and interpreting, which the degree we're developing is not, it's not a vocational degree, it's not just training people to go out and become translators. In purely vocational degrees, the best you get is some sessions on the many different codes of ethics and practice that are produced by the many different associations that represent translators and interpreters. These codes can only take you so far. So these codes tell you things like you have to be neutral, you have to respect the confidentiality, all that, and you don't take on work for which you have no competence and in which you have no expertise. But these things are not really the kinds of things I'm talking about now. These ethical principles, how you decide to live your life in a way that is fair to others, that is not just fair to yourself but to others, is not something that you can codify once and for all. And therefore what you have to do is to use the classroom as a space for critical reflection on the kind of issues that crop up again and again in the context of translation, and that with every new context require a different set of, not so much principles, but different sets of types of reflection to make sure that at the end of the day the decision that you make as a translator, or the decision that other translators make, reflects a commitment to being ethical towards others. So that's how I understand ethics. Again, you might disagree with that. In terms of politics, yes. In terms of politics, if you look at the many definitions in dictionaries, I'm talking about politics with both capital P and small p. People often distinguish between the two, and they say that politics with a capital P is the kind of stuff that the governments do and nations, and when they go to war, that's politics. Whereas politics with a small p is the politics of everyday life. I think it's all connected, but I'm talking about the whole picture. And essentially, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, politics is the total complex of relations between people living in a society. It's very much similar to the definition of ethics. It's all about the relationship between self and others, between different groups of people in society. I would offer a slightly longer definition, which we can debate, and I hope we will debate in the MA that we are working on. And I want to talk about politics as the moves and processes involved in obtaining and using power. Everything we do, all our interaction involves some exercise of power to varying degrees. So involved in obtaining and using power, including disseminating our values and narratives. So it's not just about getting more money or getting more status or getting more prestige. It's also the politics that are involved in trying to negotiate with others a set of values by which you and they should live, and trying to influence others to subscribe to the same values you subscribe to, and the same versions of events and interpretations of events that you subscribe to. And that's precisely because what you do and what others do is not separate. So their values, their way of thinking will also impact on you. And therefore that's why you have to negotiate with them all the time. And that is an aspect of politics. Hence, we talk about things like office politics, party politics, ethnic politics, family politics, sexual politics. So it's not just governments, it's everyday life is absolutely replete with political decisions in this sense. To tie the two things together, ethics and politics, I come back to the issue of the fact that self and other is inseparable, and there is we can't even begin to talk about ethics or politics without considering that there is an other to interact with. And of course, the translation comes in at this point because a lot of our interaction with others happens through translated text. And so, this is from James Handy. I like this quote because it makes the point quite clearly. It says, in a hypothetical state of nature where I am all alone, my choice to climb a tree to pick apples is not a political decision. But if you are also present, and the options that exist are to work together to pick the apples, then figure out how to divide them, or to try to pick the apples surreptitiously, or to try to exert sole despotic dominion over the apples and keep the other away, then we have problems. To take a literary example, when Robinson Crusoe was alone on the island, there was no politics. But as soon as Friday appeared, everything became political. So this is where ethics and politics come together. Once you have another to interact interact with, everything becomes political and everything involves an ethical decision because everything affects us. Okay, so this is my starting point for talking about ethics and politics, and we have to translate all this if you accept these definitions. As I said, debate is part of the picture. We have to turn all this into something that we can engage with in the classroom, and particularly in the context of translation. Of course, ethics pervades all aspects of our lives, but we are concerned with translation very specifically, both as a professional experience. Some of the people, or a lot of the people who will come on to take this and may want to end up being translators, and this therefore feeds into their own professional practice. But others will be more concerned with the way in which the translations that we all consume on a day-to-day basis in our lives influence our lives, influence the politics and the ethics of how society develops. So, I want to start with a concrete example of a text that we might look at together in class and say, what kinds of political and ethical issues does this text raise, and how would we deal with them, how would we want to deal with them in the context of translation. And people usually, when we talk about politics, certainly, or even about ethics, in the context of translation, people would say things like, oh, well, the kinds of texts I translate don't really raise these issues because I don't translate political texts, meaning texts about like from the United Nations or a government declaration. I don't translate literary texts which are replete with particular types of content of politics and ethics. I would argue that ethics and politics are embedded in every single type of text that you will translate or consume as people consume translations, but to a lesser or greater degree. And this text is neither a literary text nor a political text with a capital T. This thing is a little, even with this, it's a bit slow to come out. I don't expect you to read this, don't worry, I just want to show you what the text looks like, and then I will pick little bits of it to look at it together to show what kinds of political and ethical issues it raises. This is a text called Tour of Beauty, which was published in the Holland Herald, which is the KLM in-flight magazine. In-flight magazines, of course, are things that we all read, a lot of us read all the time. A lot of what's in-flight magazines are translations, and a lot of translators live by translating material for in-flight magazines. The status of this text as a translation or an original, I'll come back to this in a minute, but it was written by a very well-known guy called Dominique Lapierre. You may have heard of him. He is also the author of quite a few books, the most famous of which is The City of Joy, which was turned into a film. He's also well known for his charitable work, particularly for India, and he is French. I'll come back to this in a minute, but he is very fond of automobiles. He's well known for his passion for automobiles, and this text is about a tour that he did through countries like India, Afghanistan, various places in the Middle East, in a Rolls Royce. So he drove a Rolls Royce, and he's talking about the joy of driving the Rolls Royce, nothing political in that, surely, through various countries. But look at some of the language involved in this book. Okay. So, she was the loveliest baby any man could dream of marrying. The pale green 8-cylinder Corniche I was contemplating in the window of London's Conduit Street Rolls Royce showroom was the ultimate symbol of beauty and motor perfection. Driving throughout India aboard the Rolls Royce and coming back home to Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, and the whole Middle East at the wheel of such a mythical car was the ultimate dream I could think of. Though I did not possess a bowler hat and umbrella to establish my credibility, I entered the showroom absolutely determined to make that Corniche my bride, to carry on with the then gentle, sexualized language. I had her spend her first Indian night in one of the majestic garages of the Royal Bombay Yacht Club that had formerly housed the silver phantoms and silver ghosts of the Empire's high dignitaries. In a few months, I covered almost 20,000 kilometers throughout the former British Empire, often on terrible roads under the pouring rains of the monsoon, as well as in the blazing heat of summer. In spite of the filthy petrol with which I quenched her thirst, my Rolls-Royce never complained. She proudly sailed everywhere, like her ancestors had in the times of the Viceroys and the Maharajas. Now, this is a kind of text I would want to use in classroom, on an MA like this, and I would want to raise a number of issues that have ethical implications and that are, to my mind, very clear. One has to do with the metaphor that runs throughout the text. These are just little bits that show you what this is all about. The gender metaphor, the sexualized language of making the car or treating the car as a woman and attributing to that car, of course, beauty, that's lovely, very nice, thank you, but also complete submissiveness. You know, whatever you gave her to quench her thirst, she went on, never complained. There's a whole metaphorics that runs through the text, which to the reader who is alert to gender politics will be a little bit troubling. In addition to that, there's another aspect that is also troubling, which is the romanticizing of or implicit romanticizing of the colonial experience, the colonial encounter. It is projected as, very beautiful, romantic. There's a nostalgia here that convinces you that this was a beautiful time where people just traveled, smoothly and peacefully through the territories of the former British Empire and enjoyed themselves. This masks the violence of the colonial encounter, which we know a lot of people were at the receiving end of. So, for some people, this is not problematic at all. What's wrong with that? Nothing. For others, they will see a lot of ethical implications because the discourse that we produce and that we perpetuate influences the minds of people. And therefore, we have to be careful about it. What translators do about it is a different issue. I wouldn't want to put this in the classroom, discuss this in the classroom in order to say to students, this should have been translated this way, should be translated this way, or it is your responsibility not to perpetuate this kind of discourse. I would want to ask them what they would do and why, because the problem with ethics is precisely that there are many different others that you have to take into consideration. So you could say, as a translator, obviously you have a choice, unless you're a staff translator. If you're a staff translator, you don't have a lot of choice. If you're given things to translate, you can't just walk away from them and say, I'm going to translate this text, but not that text. If you're a freelance translator, obviously you have more choice, but within reason, because if you turn down too many texts, you end up with no jobs. But assuming you decide to translate it, then you could intervene in a variety of ways. Maybe in some contexts you have a space for footnotes or introductions. The translators who translated the Samuel Huntington's book, The Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of World Order, which was actually translated at least twice into Arabic. The translators who translated that disagreed with it strongly, absolutely passionately. But they had the option, because it was a book, they had long introductions in which they took the arguments apart as translators, said they didn't subscribe to them, warned you about the kind of political and ethical implications of that argument, and they also had the space of footnotes in which they could pick up individual arguments and argue against them. You probably don't have that in the context of an in-flight magazine, but once you decided to translate it, if we're talking about actual translators, obviously, if you receive this as a translation, and I'm going to argue that this is actually a translation, if you receive this as a translation, so all you have to do is respond to it as a reader, so you have to be more critical in the way you receive text. But if you decide to translate it, you have to take the rights and responsibilities of different parties into consideration. So you have to say, okay, I can subvert it, but then, well, does the author have a right to express himself in whatever way he wants? Do you, as a translator, have the right to make the decision for the author about what is right and what's wrong? Do you, as a translator, have the right to make the decision for the reader about what to read and what not to read? Or is it the right of the reader to receive texts as they are produced by the authors and make their own minds about them. These are only two aspects of the ethical problem. The third aspect, of course, there are many other aspects, but the third aspect is you as a translator have rights and obligations. Do you perpetuate this kind of discourse without any kind of argument or any attempt to alert people to the pitfalls? Whatever you decide, there are always ethical implications. Some translators who are trained on vocational courses where there's no discussion of ethics, there's no discussion of politics, there's no attempt to read text critically, they will say, you know, it's just my job, there are no ethical implications, I only produce the text, I do what I'm paid to do, and that is the only ethical responsibility I have. Even that deserves airing in the classroom and engagement. Okay, the next issue I wanted to raise with this text is the politics of translation per se. Now, if you look at Lapierre, the author of this text, is French, is not English, is French. If you look at the other books that he's written, which are available in English, you won't find the word translation or translated on the cover at all. There's no reference to the main translations of that. But if you dig deep and look at the copyright page in particular, you will find a reference to copyright to the English translation X, Y, whatever. So obviously, you will see he writes in French and his work gets translated into English. And this may well be the same thing. He may have written it in French and it may have been translated into English. That's a likely scenario. And you have to ask yourself, why is translation not, why is this not labeled as translation? Why is there an attempt? What is the politics of translation that requires publishers and other people to try and mask the fact of translation? Is translation projected as something, translated text projected as something inauthentic? And if so, why? We've all heard the usual kind of metaphorics of translation is very political in that sense. People talk about translators as traitors, for instance, about translations as the metaphor of the translators are like women, they are either beautiful or they are faithful, but they can't be both, all that kind of stuff. What kind of politics is being played here when translation, when the work of the translator is obscured and when the fact of translation is obscured? And I think this has a lot to do with the politics of meaning and with the idea in which many people invest that meaning can be pinned down once and for all, preferably through some authoritative, a single authoritative interpretation that you can believe in and that you can follow and then reject all other interpretations. Of course, I hope that as people who are studying any area of the humanities, we know that this is not a realistic way to think about meaning, and that meaning is open to interpretation in different contexts by different people. However, lots of people are invested in the idea that their meaning can be pinned down and that there is such a thing as an authoritative interpretation. Translation comes in to disrupt this if translation does not deliver the authoritative interpretation or the interpretation that you agree with, that it is because translation is problematic, inauthentic, because translators are traitors and so on. And to give you an idea how this gets played out in a genuinely political context with a capital P, we can look at the famous example of what has been attributed, the quote that has been attributed to the former president of Iran, Ahmadinejad, when he famously said something that was reported in many papers around the world as Israel must be wiped off the map, which has been contested in many different venues, in some mainstream newspapers, but also on the web by different people. This interpretation of what he said, this translation of what he said, was used obviously for political purposes to argue that Iran is a threat, to Israel and to the free world. And the lens, what is interesting here is the lens, irrespective of what you think. I mean, I don't have Persian, so I can't even offer point of view, because I don't have Persian. But people offer different points of view, but they go into extreme lengths in order to convince you that their interpretation is the only viable interpretation, and they do this through translation, obviously. And they do this, for example, this is an example of an alternative interpretation of what he said. And you can people break down every word and give you a gloss of every single word, and then ask you to kind of add up the different words to an interpretation that is the only viable interpretation. Translation, the politics of translation per se, is all tied up with this kind of struggle over meanings. And therefore, when translation is routinely masked, when the fact of translation is routinely masked, there are political consequences for this. And there are political stakes that people are playing. Okay, so this is how we might look at individual texts that we can work with in class and an MA like this in order to tease out these kind of political and ethical effects of translation. We can also look not just at individual texts, but we can also look at entire projects of translation. There are so many projects around the world, maybe more than ever now, especially because of the existence of the web and the fact that people can do an awful lot on the web easily that they couldn't do before. There are entire projects that consist of translations, and we can look at some of these projects and look at the political stakes that people are playing for. And of course you can look, some of the projects are too obvious, you can certainly bring them up in class and look at them and discuss them. But the political work that's involved is quite obvious. I wrote fairly extensively on one of those projects, the Middle East Media Research Institute. Some of you may have heard of that. You can look it up on the web. Very interesting, very dangerous project. It's an organization that was set up by an ex-Israeli intelligence officer, and it consists, most of what they do is they pick up translations, they pick up original texts, including sermons in mosques, TV programs, writings in newspapers from countries like the Arab world, Iran, Turkey, and so on. And then they translate them into a variety of languages, and the idea is that they show, of course depending on the selection of texts and the way they translate them, they show that people living in these regions are a threat to the stability of the world because they're all radical, they're all terrorists, they're all extremists and so on. That kind of thing is fairly obvious. You can certainly bring it about in the classroom, but it's fairly obvious. I'd like to look at one example that we can work with, which is a little less obvious. I don't know if you've heard of this or not, the Global Americana Institute, which, this is not a very clear picture, but it's set up by, again, it's a translation project, and it's set up by people who are actually Middle East specialists, and who, some of them at least I know, are quite committed to the region and have done quite good work for the region, like Juan Paul might be the person best known to some of you, who has, he's written good stuff about various things, political issues in the Arab world, and you can't really call him a colonialist or whatever, he means well. But let's look at what this project is. It's a translation project. It's called the Arabic Literary Translation Project. It's not actually Arabic Library Translation Project. And I'll only give you a little bit of the description of the project to give you an idea of the politics that are involved. Again, so this says, the classics of American thought and history have been little translated into Arabic. We have therefore begun a project to translate important books by great Americans and about America into Arabic, and to subsidize their publications so that they can be bought inexpensively. Very nice. We seek funding from the general public as well as from foundations. The project will begin with selected set of passages and essays by Thomas Jefferson on constitutional and governmental issues such as freedom of religion, the separation of powers, inalienable rights, the sovereignty of the people, and so on. And they go on, if you read on the description, they say things like they're also going to choose texts about Jews in America and their life in America and translate them into into Arabic. Now you have to ask yourself, why these things? Why are these topics in particular chosen for translation into Arabic? What kind of relationship between the two parties involved, America and the Arab world, is being set up? Obviously, one is projected as the donor of knowledge, as a country that has reached a certain level of democracy, open-mindedness, and the other is projected as a region or a country that is lacking in these things. They have no genuine understanding of inalienable rights, perhaps, separation of powers, and so on. The issue about Jews in particular. So it's set, the whole project is set within the framework of development. You have an underdeveloped country or region and a developed one, and knowledge flows from the developed country into the underdeveloped region. This is politics. I mean, this is politics, so whatever. To my mind, it's not, I mean, obviously you may think this is an uncharitable view on my part, and certainly one that can be contested in a debate and discussion, helpful discussion in a classroom. But to my mind, this is a subtle variant on the civilizing mission of the old days, on importing Christianity in order to civilize an uncivilized part. So these kinds of things need to be discussed, debated, and we as lecturers, as educators, have to obviously be prepared to understand that this is the various ways in which you can interpret projects like this or states of this kind are open to contestation, and there may be different views, but whatever you decide, however you approach a project like this, you have to understand that there are politics involved and that there are ethical implications. Okay, I want to move on finally to the actual curriculum and how if you're going to put a curriculum like this together, you're going to put an MA, you can't just, obviously it's a very specific MA, ethics of politics of translation, so one of the things you have to do is to decide, well, what issues would have to be central to this kind of MA? What issues do we select for giving priority to selecting text to, should I stop? What issues should we select in order to focus on in the classroom, and select texts that raise these issues because they are particularly important for translation. And I want to show you first, if this works. This is the website of a very interesting center called the Interdisciplinary Ethics Applied Center, which is based at the University of Leeds. And they specialize in training in ethics, and they essentially help the various disciplines within the University of Leeds to develop curricula in order to train the students in matters of ethics that are specific to the specific discipline. So if you look, you won't see it down here, but these are some of the disciplines for which they develop curricula in ethics, biological sciences, business, computing, engineering, environment, medicine, nanotechnology, sport and exercise sciences. These are some of the disciplines they develop curricula for. It's interesting here to note that the University of Leeds, where this center is based, is has one of the largest suite of MAs in translation in the country. They, not just one MA, they have a whole range of MAs in translation and interpreting, and yet, because this is a blind spot in the area of translation studies right across the world, and yet they haven't yet sought to develop something to do with ethics in a discipline as important as translation studies, which is all about communication and mediation. So we have a blind spot here. But I wanted to show you this in order to move on to show an example of how each discipline thinks of issues that are specific to that discipline that have to be taught in the curriculum. So, for example, in medicine, this says medical ethics deals with matters of moral conduct in medicine. It is about thinking about how one should behave and about what is morally justifiable course of action. Topics in medical ethics range from the everyday, such as consent, to the extraordinary, such as separating conjoined twins, to the groundbreaking, such as cloning, and they range from the individual, e.g. what is in the best interest of this patient, to the general, e.g. what would be morally justifiable policy of rationing when you have war, for example. This is because almost any activity in medicine can be subject to the question, is this the right thing to do, or is this morally justifiable? That last bit you can really apply to translation and certainly interpreting. But you can see how they identify things that are very specific to medicine. Consent, conjoined twins, rationing at times of war. I think we have to do something like this for translation. It hasn't been done yet. I think this MA will be the starting point to do it for the discipline at large. Nobody has sat down and said, as far as translation is concerned, these are the burning issues. These are the issues we really have to reflect on. I'm not going to do this, obviously, here because it's something, it's part of what we're going to develop, but I'm going to suggest just a couple of things that you might think about. One is representation. If translation is about nothing, if it's not about representation, that's what translation does. Translated texts generate representations of characters, of individuals, of communities, of types of people. They generate representations all the time. We have some things in the literature we can draw on which are very interesting. For example, Amal Amira, some of you are maybe familiar with her work, has a paper published in 2005, very interesting paper, in which she talks about the translation of key concepts from Arabic like Shahada and Intifada into English, and the way in which the available translations in English fail to represent the understanding of these concepts by those being represented. Because this is not about individual words or individual concepts. These words, the way you translate them, the way people understand them, feed into representations of the people for whom these concepts are part of everyday life. And so she argues that those being represented do not identify the meanings of these terms in the literature in another language. And that's an act of representation with ethical consequences. I already mentioned Middle Media Research Institute, which generates all kinds of representations of people living in this region as extremists, as violent, as fanatical, and so on. And really, pretty much everything that happens in translation has consequences for how particular groups and individuals and people, fictional or otherwise, are represented. So they generate representations and competing representations, not single representations but competing representations. And it's very interesting if you read the literature on, for example, Italy, because Italy has a particular position in the imaginary of the Western world. Italy is kind of Roman culture, it's Roman knowledge and so on. And a very interesting article by Hoda Elsadda about not only the representations, the translations of Roman and Italian literature, the representations that these translations generate in the so-called Western world, the world outside, Britain, France, and so on. Not just that, but these representations have a habit of traveling back to the point of origin and influencing the way in which those represented actually think of themselves. And that's happening all the time as well with our region. So representation is a key issue, and we have to learn to think about it critically in order to have some say in the way in which these things develop. Another very interesting area we can look at is minority-majority relations. You can obviously define minority and majority as concept in a variety of ways, but essentially if you think of minority as any kind of language or culture that doesn't have any kind of power, relative to other cultures, economic, political, culture, whatever, then we can say that, for instance, in that case, if you don't define it by actual kind of lengths of survival, if you like, traditions, numbers of people, in that case we can then talk about the Arab world being a minority culture, or Arabic being a minority language in relation to English. And in fact, it has been argued very convincingly that all in the world are now minority languages in relation to English. Some of the work that is relevant here that we can engage with is, for example, the work of Pascal Casanova, a French author who has a very well-known book translated into English as The World Republic of Letters, in which she talks about the way in which the minority-majority politics plays out in the field of literature, and how, for example, practically all literatures around the world have to be consecrated or given credibility by being translated into English and French. You can't even really be considered for a Nobel Prize unless you be translated into English or French. And I'm simplifying here because she actually has a very complex and rich argument for how the relationships between minority and majority, or different types of minority, different types of majority get played out in the field of literature. That's why she calls her book The World Republic of Letters, meaning that relatively independently of politics and economic power, there is another kind of republic called the Republic of Letters, in which relations between different communities get negotiated through translation. Another type of politics that we can talk about, with of course always with ethical implications, in relation to, what do I do? Do I press escape? Escape. Another type of politics that gets played out in relation to minority and majority has to do with the very decision to be translated as an author. So you may be surprised to know that despite all this and the fact that you have to be consecrated to English in order to make it onto the world stage, you may be surprised to know that there are authors from minority languages, particularly ex-colonized communities, who refuse to be translated into English and possibly French. One of those is Vicky Jenkinson, who is an Irish author, and she refuses to be translated into English. I'll just read you what she says, why she does that. She says she refuses to be translated into English as a small rude gesture to those who think that everything can be harvested and stored in an English-speaking island. So she refuses to be part of the process of increasing the wealth of English and the mileage of English by giving her word to that kind of store of knowledge. And that's also to do with partly with minority-majority relations, but also partly, of course, with colonized and ex-colonized relations. Then there are issues that have to do with globalization, global economy, globalization of everything, including the globalization of resistance. You know, protest movements now are global. Protest movements that are taking place here in Egypt now are constantly connected with global movements of protest. So the world is kind of one big space now. But some of the consequences for translation, political consequences, ethical consequences, have to do, for example, with the concentration of news reporting now in the hands of a small number of news agencies like Reuters, like Agence France, Associated Press, and the Chinese one now, increasingly. The concentration of news reporting, mainstream news reporting, in the hands of these small agencies, which are now global, has resulted in certain patterns of translation that have political consequences, both for translators and for the world at large. So, for example, one of the consequences is now everything is part of a kind of mainstream process in which translation is almost totally integrated into the editorial work of journalists, with two results. One is that the labor of translation is masked, so that you can't tell what is not a translation anymore, and you can't tell what you receive. People read quotes from well-known people, even eyewitnesses from various events in the world. They read them in English and they think this is precisely what they said in English. They don't even question that there may be something different, or maybe their understanding of events is different, because they assume that everything happened and is reported in English. So the fact of translation is is cancelled. And of course, there's also concentration of the reporting itself in the hands of those agencies. As a response to this, you also have, because there's always resistance to everything that happens, you also have an increasing number of groups and projects like Interpress Service, IPS, like Indymedia, which try to balance this by doing their own reporting. These are small groups who are not doing this for profit. They don't like what's happening in kind of through globalization, the concentration of news reporting in the hands of these small numbers of agencies. So they do their own journalism, they do their own reporting, and they translate this stuff into a lot of different languages, including languages that mainstream reporting doesn't really bother with too much. A lot of this translation, almost all of this kind of translation, is done by volunteer translators, which is another new pattern that really expanded with globalization. An awful lot of the translation that goes on and that you experience, particularly on the web, is done by volunteer translators, not by paid translators. And that brings me to the last example of an issue that we can engage with, which is crowdsourcing. I don't know if you know what is crowdsourcing means. People use this a lot of different things now. They talk about crowdfunding as well. That's a process where you source whatever you want through the crowd. You don't go and hire somebody to do a job for you. You advertise usually on the web. You say, we're doing this project. Either we're crowdfunding for it, so just ordinary people like you and I, if you believe in our cause, send us some money, or crowdsourcing. If you have the kind of expertise we need, we haven't got money to pay. Usually, sometimes you haven't got money to pay, but I also mentioned the big organizations are now doing the same thing. They have the money, but they don't want to pay, and they say to people, come volunteer for us, do the translation for us, and this is good for everybody. Now, crowdsourcing for organizations like Wikipedia, like Facebook, Twitter, all these places, TEDx, is, in some respects, again, you have to engage with it and see the different aspects. It's good because it reduces the digital divide and it makes a lot of knowledge and a lot of material available in a lot of languages for people who can make use of it. However, it is also a form of exploitation, and there is actually a petition by a group called Translators for Active Practice, which is available on the web, which is against crowdsourcing of translation, because they alert you to the kind of very extremely exploitative contracts that these organizations make the volunteer translators sign. So these translators volunteer their work, they don't get a penny, and yet they have to sign an agreement that tells them, this is a Twitter agreement, you have no rights in anything that you produce. We can alter it any way you like. We can decide not to use it even after you produce it and we told you to produce it. So these kinds of things are obviously very problematic and have consequences for the professional community, because if people keep relying on crowdsourcing, then obviously the whole community of translators, professional translators, will end up being adversely affected, but also because of these kinds of exploitative practices that are involved in crowdsourcing. Okay, I'm going to finish by saying that these are just some of the issues that we will raise. I'm going to finish by saying that, of course, in order to raise these issues, debate them profitably in the classroom, and think of more issues, because obviously these are not the only issues, we have to engage with a very broad range of literature. We can't just go to the literature on translation studies, which, to my mind, has so far been very, very disappointing on the issue of ethics in particular. There isn't much really there that would sustain an MA like this. So we have to go, this is an interdisciplinary MA, and we have to look at different sources. Certainly the literature on ethics, most of which comes from philosophy, that would be important. But not just philosophy, communication studies as well produces a lot of more kind of down-to-earth literature on ethics. I think ethnography is one of the most important areas we have to engage with, because ethnography is really all heavily based on translation, at least traditionally today ethnographers also do ethnography in their own communities, and there may not be a language divide, but traditionally it was all about going into a community whose language the ethnographers didn't speak, they had to learn and then live with the community and work with them. And there's extensive discussion of issues of representation, for instance, in ethnography, how the communities that the ethnographer writes about are represented. So that's a very important area. Post-colonial theory, definitely. As we saw the example of Tour of Beauty, raises issues relevant to that. Gender studies, much of contemporary, latest literature on literary theory, I think, also engages with this. And some of the most recent and more critical literature in translation studies. So we have a big job to do, really, because I think something like this has not been put together before. An MA specifically on the ethics and politics of translation has not been attempted before. As we saw, even in the existing MAs, the issue of ethics is hardly features in the curriculum. People don't pay much attention. And I think this is going to be a groundbreaking master's, and we have to work hard to put together something that is coming from a variety of sources and requires engagement with a wide range of literature. But I think once it is available, it will inspire similar development elsewhere in the world, not just in the Arab world, but also in France, Britain, the US, where such MAs, such degrees simply don't exist. And I'm going to leave you with just some suggestions strictly from translation studies of publications which do engage with the issue of ethics, sometimes politics as well, as in Theo Hermans. Theo Hermans, who's a very well-known figure in translation studies, I know that knows him. He's now an honorary fellow of the University of Manchester, so I'm hoping to be able to bring him across as part of the team at some point. And he's certainly written about the politics of translation and the ethics of translation. And I'm happy to leave this copy of this PowerPoint to be placed anywhere, because I saw people taking notes frantically. You don't need to. You can have access to this PowerPoint. Okay?
And like you, I had to research one for his interests and what he works on. Now, if coal is itself, as you say,
Well,
from being colonialist, if the text is published along with the translator's introduction and Lebanese critics' introduction taking issue with Thomas Jefferson as presented in the book. What's the danger there?
This is precisely the kind of debate that should take place in the class. Precisely. I would want to look at, at the whole description of the project. I would want to look at the books and sellers that come out. If you have the flip side, as you said, of global Christianity, you still have to question the politics. What assumptions are the people who put the project together bringing into the equation, and with what implications? We all have assumptions, and one of the most important things to do in an MA like this is not just to question others' assumptions on something like this, but our own assumptions and our own values. And so this is something that I mean, as I said, you might see my view of this as uncharitable, but in fact, I really think that it's done within a development project. There is an assumption there that these things are lacking. We have them. We're going to pass on the good knowledge to other people, and that is an assumption that you will always have if you have a project like this. A better project, from my point of view, would be one that would be devised with people from the culture who also know what they want and what they don't want. Don't make all the decisions for them. Then you would have a give and take, and you would have more of a balanced project. And as I said from the beginning, I know that Juan Paul is well-intentioned, he's a good person, there's no problem with that. But even well-intentioned people have politics, as I said. All the time we're arguing with other people. We want to convince them that our values are better than theirs and they should adopt them. We all have politics. And it's very important for people, for students. One of the first lectures perhaps that have to be given is about critical reflection, because I know my own students that I teach every year. Every year I have a new group of students, because I teach on MA as well, and ours is only 1 year. So every year we get a new group of students, and every year I have to spend a lot of time explaining to them what I mean by critical, because they think critical means finding fault with things, criticizing, but critical is obviously much. Critical means having precisely this kind of debate in the class.
Actually, kind of answered my question. Because then I just wanted to ask you, when you talk about the book, I just attached the name about the translators who didn't agree.
The Samuel Huntington, the National Civilizations and the Remaking of World Order is a very, very well-known book. It's informed the kind of neoconservative policies of George Bush and co. It's about, did you know the book or not? It's quite an important book. You don't know it. It's by a political scientist who's now dead, who used to teach at Harvard University. He first published it as an article in Foreign Policy, which is a very, very influential journal in the States, read by politicians and people in Congress. And basically his thesis is that we've gone past the period of wars of ideologies, so the issue now is not communism versus capitalism. It's about the clash of civilizations, and he divided the world into 8 civilizations, I think, and one of them is the Islamic civilization, one of them is the Judeo-Christian civilization. At the end of the day, it's all a fight between the Islamic civilization and Judeo-Christian civilization, and unlike communism and capitalism, in the past you could be Russian, but you could not believe in communism, and you could be a capitalist, but with the clash of civilization, if you're born a Muslim, bad luck. There's no way out for you. That's kind of. He actually says that Islam is inherently violent.
He says Islam has no rule.
Yeah. So that's the kind of discourse is jumping. And the translators engaged with it quite extensively in all kinds of venues. One of them has 2 introductions, not one. One of them has an introduction of 46 pages. 46 pages. Loads of it, of footnotes. They could express they could warn the reader about this kind of discourse. They could express their own position.
Thank you for most fascinating lecture.
Thank you.
And in all of your lectures that I was lucky enough to attend,
I always get the feeling of that it is a big conflict. I always express that of the concept of conflict and my attempt to control the uncontrollable. I always ask myself simple questions like what the MA students of that intended program will be able to tell or do after finishing that program.
I think, do you want to obviously this has to be kind of finalized in negotiation with Cairo University colleagues, and we haven't had our meeting yet. But my provision, of course, on this is that this masters can produce two types of people. One, and they're not mutually exclusive, by the way, but one would be people who actually want to work as translators. As we know, certainly in the Arab world, all kinds of people work as translators who do not have MA in translation. People do an MA in literature, they go out and become translators, right? So the fact that this MA may or may not include an actual practical translation experience doesn't mean that people who take it cannot go out and work as translators. So that would be one type. Another type, and I see this happening with our MA. Our MA kind of prepares people for two types of careers with series of options. One is a vocational career, but we still force them to do critical reflection. I think that translators who are not trained in critical reflection are a danger to themselves and to society, actually. So many of them do end up being vocational translators, actual professional translators, and some don't really necessarily want to go out and work as professional translators, but they want to be able to carry on to do a PhD in translation, and they want to carry on and go on to be academics, for example, or advisors, consultants on projects that involve translation where they don't necessarily translate themselves, but they have the ability and the understanding of what's involved in translation to act as consultants and advisors. So our students go out and do all kinds of things. I think this MBA can also prepare students to do a wide range of things, not just to do practical translation. But whatever they do, I hope that they will be alert to the politics and ethics of translation. That's the most important.
I would just say that one of the aims of tomorrow is to answer these questions. And this is definitely what we're doing tomorrow. Yeah. So, questions, comments?
It's just a comment, and it goes when we talk about the media and the news agencies.
Yes.
It brought to my mind civil societies. For instance, you have too many human rights organizations based in Egypt, let's say, and they produce all sorts of publications that relate to human rights and development and all of that. And I think that, I don't know if that could be factored in that part, because they are quite influential for certain sectors in society, particularly people working in communities as well, and they do influence somehow with the publications that they produce these communities, either from or into Arabic.
And of course, because we live in a globalized world, they connect with human rights organizations outside Egypt, of course, and that interaction takes place sometimes through translation.
And it really involves a lot of the ethical questions that you brought about.
Absolutely.
The masking and what the translators.
Yeah.
One
of the interesting new phenomena I've noticed is that also if you tweet like me, you notice that a lot of people now, particularly those with a lot of followers all over the world, they tweet the same thing twice, once in English, once in Arabic. So that's also an act of translation, which with its own politics and.
Right. I think we can stop here, and I think Professor Baker has given us a lot of food for thought, and we'll continue this discussion tomorrow, inshallah. And I hope I can see most of you tomorrow at the workshop, because this is when we decide what to do for our MA at Cairo University. And I'd like to thank Hoda Baker, and please join me in thanking her.
Thank you.